Well, hello everyone. This is Melanie from Melanie B's Creative Studio and Supplies, and today I have something special for you. I'm going to give you 3 recipes for making your own Flow-Aid or Flow Improver. Let me tell you what I have in front of me. These are the supplies you're going to need, depending on which recipe that you choose out of the 3 that I'm going to show you today. I will include links in the description below. These are my Amazon affiliate links. I will make a very small commission, like 1 or 2% off your purchases, which I do appreciate because that is how I'm able to afford to purchase these products and to keep my channel going for you. I also have a new super thanks button, which is below all of my videos. And if you really love the content that I'm going to show you today, please click that super thanks button and leave me a little contribution and a special comment so I can reply to your comment with a special shout out. Your contribution really helps me continue what I'm doing. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so I did purchase the mammoth size bottles of each of these because they were the best value. I will link you to the best options that are available in the best quality and everything that you're going to need. Recipe number 1 uses vegetable glycerin. Recipe number 2 uses propylene glycol. And recipe number 3 uses Finish Jet Dry, which is a dishwashing rinse agent. So that is something you may already have in your kitchen. The other items you're going to see here are 3 bottles. Now, I'm going to show you these recipes using 4-ounce clear bottles. I like to use 8-ounce bottles in my studio. That's a personal preference. But whichever bottles you choose, I highly recommend that you use bottles with a twist cap to make sure that you're sealing the cap, and otherwise, this is a liquid. It will evaporate. The next thing I have here are items that I actually carry in my online store at Melanie B's Creative Supplies. That is a pop-up funnel and also the pipettes that you're going to see right there in the very front. The pipettes I sell for less than $1. They're super handy to just have on hand. The other thing I have here is a set of measuring spoons. Because the recipes call for a couple of these to be used in drop quantities, I thought I would measure them out in the measuring spoons so that I can determine how much you will need in a measuring spoon quantity in case you don't want to sit there and count out drops. All right, the other main ingredient that I have off camera is distilled water. It is very important that you use distilled water and not tap water because you don't want mold or mildew to grow in whichever recipe you choose to use. Filtered water does not work as well, so I highly recommend picking up a gallon of distilled water. It's super inexpensive. It's nice to have in your studio for other uses. I'm also going to use my Faux Memo label maker. This is a total option, and some labels because I like to print the recipe on the bottle. And I'm hiding the recipe right now because I am going to provide it to you in a minute. But I always put the recipe on the bottle of whatever I'm making so that I don't have to go back when I've put the recipe in a safe place. You guys know what I'm saying, right? And I can't find it again, so that when I pick up this bottle later, I have the recipe in front of me and I can pull out the ingredients and just make it again. So that is just an optional thing. I've shown that Faux Memo before. You can handwrite if you would like. I just find that the thermal printers don't smear over time. Let's get started with the recipes. I will put the recipe for each one of these up on the screen so that you can do a screenshot and save it in your photos. Now that I'm done making all of the recipes, I want to test these using some old paint pots and compare them to the Liquitex brand of Flow-Aid and see which, if any, of these are comparable to Flow-Aid. After running this series of tests, then I can give you the pros and cons of each recipe and hopefully offer some insight about which one may be best for you. First, let me talk about what I have in front of me right now. In the glass bottle to the left, I have regular Flow-Aid. Then I have each of the 3 recipes. I pulled 4 original paint pots that came from the same paint by number kit. This is how I store my little leftover paint pots, and I've done a video on these paint buckets that I use in my studio. I'll link you to that in the description below. Over here, I have shipper leftover paint pots. I want to be able to test whether these flow improvers work with the flow method. And that's why I pulled 4 of my leftover shipper paints. In front of me, I have an Arteza 5x7 canvas panel. This has already been primed with a white gesso. Just like most of our paint by number kits come, they are pre-primed with white gesso. It is not the same as a clear gesso, but I wanted to run this test on a canvas that was most similar to what we normally paint on. I'm also going to be using 2 Melanie B custom paintbrushes. This is the flat size 2, and the other one is a watercolor size 6. That one's going to be used for the flow technique. As always, I have my collapsible flower pot water cup, a stainless steel stirring stick, and my custom rubber scrubber in the bottom of my cup. So let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to point out that the consistency of the recipe with the jet dry was a little thicker and a little more difficult to stir because it kept getting clumpy, almost congealed in the center when I was trying to stir it. I wanted to show you as I'm stirring these others how smooth and creamy they are and how easy they are to stir. The paint pot with the Flow-Aid is remarkably similar in consistency to the one with the jet dry recipe. In that, when I was stirring originally, it was stirring in one big clump until I kept stirring and it finally started to kind of break down. That's what the jet dry paint pot did as well. After I finished the test for all 4 of these other recipes, I realized that I really should also test diluted Flow-Aid in order for this test to be really fair, because Flow-Aid is intended to be diluted when you use it with acrylic paints. So it's really important for me to run this test as well. I pulled out a couple of other paint pots in order to do this test. I have my bottle of diluted Flow-Aid, and the mixture for diluted Flow-Aid is 20 drops of distilled water to 1 drop of Flow-Aid. And you're going to just repeat that mixture until whatever size bottle you're using is full. So let's talk about the final summary for each of our recipes and how they compare to the regular Flow-Aid and the diluted Flow-Aid. But the purpose of this test was for me to find alternative solutions. So what I learned was that straight Flow-Aid, obviously it works well, but I did notice that when I mix it with my paints, that as I stirred, it felt like I was getting resistance in my stir stick. I'm sure that is because it is supposed to be diluted, which is why I decided to go back and add to the test and put in some diluted Flow-Aid. And when I did that, it really gave me a beautiful consistency, and it was very smooth in the test. Now, you have to be careful of how many drops you add of diluted Flow-Aid because we don't want to create a problem with the opacity of the paint, which is why we're using Flow-Aid to begin with instead of water. Recipe number 2 is the one with the glycerin. It was extremely smooth in the smooth test. Then you'll notice I added a test that I had not intended to do to begin with. And that's where I tried to get the same amount of paint on my brush each time and take it as far across as I could before I started getting skipping. Well, you'll notice the glycerin test did a beautiful job with that. So what that means is for us, we're going to be able to get more surface area with the paint that we pick up, and it's going to just flow across our canvas. Recipe 2 is the one with the propylene glycol. It was very smooth in the smooth test. Now here, as I started to do the test with the flow and how far I could go with it, you'll notice it started skipping pretty early. Making sure I have the exact same amount on my brush each time is questionable. So that was where this test is almost hard to compare, but that surprised me because I really loved how smooth it was here. Recipe 3 is the one with jet dry. It was not as smooth here, and it started skipping pretty early on when I did the skip test here. The diluted Flow-Aid really did a beautiful job. I then showed you in the paint pots themselves the consistency. Now it varied how many drops I added to each paint pot because some of them were a little thicker than others. But when I let them sit for a minute after I did the test and I came back, I wanted to see how they set up and whether they were still creamy. And that's when I was showing you how they stirred. Flow-Aid set up quite a bit, and it wasn't as creamy when I came back to it. Again, that's because I wasn't using it in the proper manner that it was intended, which is diluted. So maybe that's why they suggest that we dilute our Flow-Aid. You'll notice, as I mentioned really early on in this video, when I print a label for my bottles, I always put the recipe. So when I go back to make this again, I'll make sure that I have that recipe on there. I did not look at this paint pot, so I'm going to open that up in a minute and look at it and see what the consistency is after it's been sitting there for a little bit. The consistency of recipe 1 with the glycerin was beautiful. Same with number 2. Number 3 felt like the Flow-Aid. It was just tugging. Even in the beginning when I first added the drops, it felt like it was resisting me. And if you notice when I was stirring it, it was like stirring in one big clump. But the original paint was the same consistency as the other paints in that same paint kit. So it just didn't feel quite as smooth or creamy, which would explain some of this. It's just not doing as well as these other recipes. This test with the flow method was not about how they look when they're dried, whether that's affecting the opacity. It was none of that. This test was more about whether these recipes will work if you're going to use them with the flow method. And so as you could see when I was painting them on, it worked beautifully with all of them. So whichever recipe you use, they all work well. Out of all of the recipes that I've brought to you today, if I had to pick one, I think it's pretty clear at this point that my favorite recipe and the one that I will continue to make and continue to use in my studio from now on is the one with glycerin. It's very simple. It's a natural ingredient which makes me feel really good about using it. I believe it's used with candle making and things like that. So it's not a one-trick pony. I actually decided to look up its other uses so that if you purchase a mammoth-sized bottle like the one I have, you can use it for a multitude of handmade items like body wash, facial serum, bath whips, homemade soaps, and the list goes on and on. I want to thank you all for joining me today, and I hope that you have found this information to be invaluable, because I have to say, I really have found this information to be invaluable for myself in my studio. I do a video thinking this will really help my viewers, my members on Patreon, my members at my Facebook group, and all of my social media to save money. It will help them improve their experience with their paint by number projects. And that's what my channel has always been about, is making sure that I have helped you to keep your projects as frustration-free as possible. It is not about making that almighty dollar. I mean, it does help to bring in a little income to help keep me going on my channel, but these things make me like so happy to find ways to budget. It's really kind of good for my soul. If you like what you saw in today's video, please do me a favor and subscribe to my channel. Be sure to comment below. Let me know which one you think you will try with your projects. Be sure to give me a thumbs up. And if you think this information is valuable to someone you know, please be sure to share this video. And if you really loved it, you can use that super thanks button below. Leave me a small contribution and a special comment, and I will be sure to respond. No matter what you do to contribute, whether it is subscribing, commenting, liking, sharing, or leaving me a super thanks, I appreciate each and every one of you for your support. Thank you as always for watching, and I will see you back soon.